A warm welcome to the program. Today, we'll be looking at Africa's efforts to improve the continent's vaccine sufficiency and issues around migration in commemoration of International Migration Day 2023. I'm Felicity Eziwike. 1 year after laying its foundation, the German company BioNTech, short for Biopharmaceutical New Technologies, has launched the first BioNTainer at its manufacturing facility in Kigali, Rwanda, to facilitate the production of mRNA vaccines. This effort is one of the company's multiple initiatives aimed at helping to build a sustainable and resilient African vaccine ecosystem and supporting equitable access to novel medicines globally. Spanning approximately 30,000 square meters, the Rwanda-based facility is expected to start by producing 50 million vaccines, but the production is expected to increase depending on the demand. Aside from Kigali, BioNTech in March said it plans to ship BioNTainers to Senegal and potentially South Africa. BioNTech co-founder and chief executive officer believes Africa will have one of the most advanced manufacturing facilities in the world. According to him, BioNtainers will be able to manufacture any kind of mRNA vaccines. The genesis of BioNTech setting up in Africa lies in the much criticized delay in shipping Western-made COVID-19 vaccine doses to the continent during the pandemic. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame reminded everyone at the inauguration ceremony that the African Union had made a firm commitment that the continent will not be in that position ever again. This is a huge milestone, no doubt. But should we be celebrating? My guest on the program is the Director General, West African Institute of Public Health, Abuja, Dr. Francis Ohanido. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much.
Let's begin by I had to go look for what it means, so I'm sure some of our viewers will be wondering, what is mRNA-based vaccines and what are BioNTainers? I'm not even sure I got the name.
Okay, so it's a pleasure to be on this program, and I think I will start by saying that it's an exciting moment for Africa because some of us that were on the front lines of the pandemic actually faced a lot of pains, and in the course of the whole thing. And fortunately, Africa came out. It's okay for it, in a lot of ways. But had it been otherwise, we would have probably had a terrible time on the continent. And one of the things that came out clearly, like you pointed out, is the fact that Africa needs to be able to be self-sufficient around vaccine. And so it's a cause for celebration. It's a cause for celebration on different levels. But to start with, mRNA vaccines are vaccines that are made with particles of the genetic code. There's DNA, there's mRNA. So their particular focus is to use splices of that mRNA to trigger response that is similar to the disease in the person. So that, as you know, what vaccine aims to do is actually to teach your body to be prepared in case the event of being exposed to a particular organism. So basically that's what, and this type is basically done with the mRNA. It's not a complete organism. Sometimes vaccines are made from either deactivated organisms in the sense that they are not alive, or partially active organisms. So there are different types of potency that is generated from these types of this thing. But for the COVID thing, one of the things that happened during COVID was an accelerated this because the mRNA technology had reached its zenith at that period. So it helped us to be able to develop vaccines that could enable the world to be able to fight that particular epidemic. But Africa suffered because of vaccine nationalism. Even with money, we couldn't get enough vaccines for Africa, and it was very painful for everybody on the continent. Everybody that was a major stakeholder around that felt very pain. So there has been so much push to be able to have that level of self-sufficiency around. So the BioNTainers are actually basically chambers where these mRNAs are.
You share the sentiment of Rwandan President Paul Kagame that this is the beginning of the democratization of vaccine technology. Are we truly in that process now? Will we ever not see or experience what transpired during the COVID-19 as a result of this milestone? Or we're just about scratching the surface?
No. I think one thing you have to know about technology transfer is this is real technology transfer, because if you start putting BioNTainers in a place like Dakar and putting BioNTainers in South Africa in the future, you already have 3 bases on the African continent, and that should cover a light chunk of response in terms of epidemics. So that is actually what it should be like, and it means that you will not go outside the continent for vaccines as much as you need for most of the events, if there any other pandemic comes up, which we predict may come. But the thing with these BioNTainers is that the mRNA technology is not only for COVID. So we need to understand that the BioNTech has been working on malaria, TB, HIV, and other opportunistic infections that you may want to deal with that will make impact in terms of survival around the vaccine ecosystem. But for this to happen, it needs to have places, modular systems on African continent. And what has been set up in Kigali, in the Rwandan economic zone, is a modular system for producing mRNA technology. The specific city depends on the demand, and like we say, they can produce up to 50,000 doses or more, 50 million doses, or more. And that is very important, because what it means is that at even a regional level, sub-regional level, that can be able to make a large impact in terms of epidemics. So it's possible. And who are the people that are going to man this? They are going to be Africans, and the Pasteur Institute in Senegal, for example, has some of the best brains in Africa in terms of epidemiology and vaccine production and laboratories. And we had one of the most advanced laboratories even before COVID in the world. So it's not a difficult thing to be able to.
I was going to bring this question up much later on in the course of the conversation, but you raised it when you talked about the fact that they will be producing other vaccines for HIV and malaria and the likes. One thing that stood out for me in the course of preparing was the talk about clinical trials. And there's been concerns about, trials and the repercussion. Will all the rules be followed? Have you heard of concerns about doing this clinical trial in Africa, giving us one thing with one hand and using us as experiment on the other hand? That might seem a lot naive, but that is the concern that kept picking at me in the course of prepping. So I would like you to speak on that a little.
Okay, so the truth of it is that we cannot eat our cake and have it. One of the things that one of the complaints around some of the previous vaccines we've had is that a large chunk of them were not done on the African continent in terms of trials. And then now we are having opportunity to even have these trials. It's also generating those. You can't satisfy everybody, but the truth of it is that because the Africa CDC and the Africa Union is very, very concerned about the issue of getting this level of vaccine sufficiency on the continent, all eyes will be on BioNTech and all these BioNTainers as it sets them up. They will be monitored. There will be accountability systems that will be placed. They are not just coming to set up these things and just leave them there. They have to be measured by even the countries. I can see by the presence of Macky Sall at the launch in Kigali, it shows that high level commitment towards making sure this thing becomes a reality. Already, like I said, the Pasteur Institute in Senegal is a very advanced place, so it is not something new. So,
okay, how excited are you though about the training for specialization that will be part of the process of them coming to Africa, localizing the skills so that we can do these things ourselves. That's one of the comments that was raised about, training specialized personnel to manage the facility. Do you think we'll get to a point where it will be fully manned by Africans?
Yes, I think so. And I think it will be foolhardy of the countries that are going to host these BioNTainers not to maximize the opportunities there. That is where also the health diplomacy comes in. The ability to also negotiate around these things, because nothing comes for nothing. So, they should also be very proactive as much as they've given political will, the level of political will at the level of the presidents of like Senegal, Rwanda, to be able to make this thing happen with support of African Union and German government, and the European Union too. So it is to negotiate around these things. So I think it's possible. It's just having the political will and the health diplomacy depth, to be able to have this thing happen. It's not left for them. At country level, I cannot prescribe for Senegal, I can't prescribe for Rwanda, but I expect that they should be able to have thought through this in a way that will bring value to their economy, value to their people, value to even their science, in the sense of moving them up there, at that level where they can.
For once, I dare to say that there's been some sort of demonstration of political will in the instance of the time span between when the idea was mooted and now we're talking about inauguration. So, that gives us some kind of hope. But where I would have concern is the target date for production. The company says they're looking at 2025, and that would depend on how much they educate and, they're able to do the transfer of technology and how things are, I don't know. Do you expect that we will see the same speed with which the execution was carried out, the inauguration was done, we will see it with the production?
Yes, I think so. With caution, I think so. The reason is this. It's an investment. This whole thing is not a freebie. It's an investment. And when you're investing, you also want to be sure you get back something out of it. You are not just putting it there to waste, and we're talking about multilateral institutions and governments, that are part of this whole thing, and it's of strategic importance to Africa, and its location of the first modular form in Rwanda is also a signature for Africa, because Rwanda has done a lot of things that appear to be on the right track in terms of universal health coverage, in terms of making sure things work within their system. So it's a signature for Africa, and it's something a lot of African countries need to learn from. So I think that is very important, because and knowing the kind of government you have in Rwanda, they're not going to let this thing just falter and just go to waste. They will make sure it works. So we expect the same thing with Senegal and further on, probably South Africa. So this is very important. Like I said, it's very critical that it gives us an opportunity for the level of health diplomacy we've never seen before in Africa. And it's also important that we also have to recognize the African Union's role. African Union has been able to shape this together with the Africa CDC, specialized agency. And since Africa CDC came of age last year as an agency of the African Union, it's been working around the clock. And it also has resources to be able to pull some stunts at that level that we are not seeing before in Africa. With the support, it has been able to build respectful partnerships with organizations like Mastercard Foundation, which are not prescribing for it, but working with it to be able to achieve some of the things it wants to achieve and funding them. So I think we're in a space now in Africa where everybody knows globalization can work to our own advantage too, in terms of knowledge transfer and building the kind of local energy that we need to drive the kind of manufacturing that we need around the health systems in Africa.
I particularly like the fact that you gave AU their flowers for a change, because it seems half the time when we talk about what they do on the continent, they seem to get knocks all the time that they're not doing enough. At least this is something they can celebrate. And you're right, it is an investment. The question though would be, how are they going to recoup their investment? This is solely sponsored. Yes, we know the Europe team, von der Leyen spoke at how they are committed to helping AU achieve 60% sufficiency. But it's a business at the end of the day. How do you think they will recoup in such a way that it will impact the efficiency of the project itself?
Okay, so I look at this from two levels. I look at it from the economic level. I also look at it from the health security level. The European community is also very worried that one of the vaccines that they are working on the mRNA cost is actually the mpox. Mpox is becoming a global problem, and it's gradually becoming more re-emerging each time and getting much more wider in terms of its pandemicity globally. So it's a problem. So they are very concerned about that. And also the issue of malaria, because of climate change, they are also very looking futuristically in terms of malaria. Places that are currently temperate may change in terms of temperature change, and they may start experiencing malaria in terms of because of the Anopheles mosquitoes could begin to inhabit those new habitats that hitherto did not have malaria. So some of these things are things that countries and multilaterals like that are looking in terms of the future. So some of the benefits are not purely economic; they are also strategic benefits from health security point of view. So that is why I say nobody will want this to go to waste, because all those who are invested in it are invested in it for various reasons. And Africa, for once, has a room to shine. I don't think the African Union and the African cities will want to lose this opportunity. Neither will Paul Kagame lose this opportunity, and other partners who have been part of this whole process to lose it and let it go into the doldrums. No. I am positive for once that the kind of governance level, health governance we've seen so far, and the level of political will is a signature political will for Africa. The Africa we want is actually evolving, either slowly, but it's evolving. And we need to understand that health is probably driving it. We may not have gotten it right in political space and other spaces, but the health sector is beginning to get its acts right in Africa. And if you notice all the trajectories of activities that have happened in public health recently, take, for example, the Conference of Public Health in Africa, which held just in Lusaka, and the one last year. Last year was one of the biggest conferences in the world. Everybody came to Africa to attend the CPHIA, and it's a baby of Africa. So we need to know that these things are possible when you have political will and you have the people who are committed and determined to change the narrative. Africa should begin to write its own stories. If not, we can't have other people write our stories for us.
I personally don't know a lot about medicine and what goes on with vaccine production, but I am super excited reading about this coming to Africa. And again, we know that rival Moderna is also unveiled plans this year to open a facility as well in Africa. Does that, do you think that the goal of 60% sufficiency with this coming in of not just BioNTech, but Moderna, that Africa might even exceed her own target?
Yeah, so the thing with vaccine is the fact that vaccine consumption vaccine production cannot be done by every country, especially for common or for diseases that are of note that we usually battle with. So you will always have that gap. And when there's what you produce usually for those vaccines, you are targeting like a scale where it's pre-pandemic. And if there's a pandemic for any of those organisms, then you scale up your production. So what happens here is that when you talk about 65% for most of the endemic diseases that may, or endemic state kind of this thing. But if you have a pandemic state, you cannot really immediately quantify what you will go. You scale up depending on the demand. And that's what they are pointing to about the 50 million doses that based on demand, they can scale up. And that's what happens in epidemic or pandemic states, because you will have to look at how you can scale up to meet the needs, because when you plan and you project, you don't project for whole population. Usually you project for a particular segment of potential projections for a segment of the population that you want to reach quickly and be able to achieve some level of coverage. Then when you go for full production, you are aiming to achieve what you call the herd immunity within that population, to make sure you have suffused enough of the vaccine within that population, at least probably up to 80-90%, so that a lot of them will break the transmission of that organism. But usually when you start, you are not targeting the whole population all at once. Your production capacity has to scale up and be sustained at a level where you can be able to meet the demands as it goes forward. Because it's money that you're putting there.
As optimistic as this looks, as exciting as it looks, there is still that part that holds back when we talk about, when we hear rather about togetherness. Let me see what I wrote here. The President von der Leyen talked about the contribution of the Europe team to this project. And she even quoted Chinua Achebe talking about what we can achieve with togetherness and all of that. When you hear speech like that, you know, showing how much we can achieve when we come together, and then you think back to the African experience during the COVID-19 pandemic, what pricks your heart, and what would you want African leaders to be always conscious of in their interaction with other parts of the world, global leaders, in terms of ensuring that Africa is, you know, safe?
Okay, so it's important that our leaders understand that they have power. They are not totally as helpless as they make it out to be. Because, like I pointed out, one of the costs of this investment is the plank of global health security. A lot of countries that are involved are also looking at their own future. Because if any pandemic comes out of Africa, an epidemic that gains pandemic proportion, it's a threat to everybody. And that's why it's about all of us. And all of us in this sense, I use the Igbo, like she pointed out, is the Igbo word is actually Iwerike, is the harmony in togetherness. And the closest thing to the Bantu or the South African thing about what they call Ubuntu. I am because you are. We need to begin to understand these things play out in the health, especially where it involves global health security. We cannot repeat what happened in the past in terms of vaccine nationalism, where some countries ordered it at the detriment of the less endowed parts of the world. Let me put it that way. And we have to learn that we should be each other's keeper, because the next pandemic may define even what superpower is in this our universe of things. Because a pandemic can shut down a whole country. And it might be one of the strongest countries in the world. And we change the dynamics of even the polarization of power in our whole world. So we all know this thing. And COVID has shown us signs of that. And so we need to be very careful. And we need to be each other's keeper. And African leaders need to be playing up that card. That you can't just do what you want. We are all together in this boat. And we need to work together to make sure that we find some solutions to some of the problems that may come in future. Whether pandemics of the future will come, they will definitely come. Because of our lifestyle, the things we've done to our environment, our environment is paying us back in some ways because of also how we have also mismanaged and squandered some of the things of nature. So those things are there, and we need to work together to be able to stem some of those things that may come in future.
All right, I'm told we're almost out of time for this part of the conversation. So quickly, I'd like you to speak on accessibility, because one of the things that, you know, transpired during the COVID-19 pandemic, you see some people were better, some people were, I've forgotten the phrase now, some are more important than others when it comes to accessibility. What must African leaders do to ensure that these vaccines, when the time does come, that the ordinary man gets access to it without paying through his nose?
Yeah, so that's the whole point of this whole thing we're doing. It's not just a way of saying, oh, because we had vaccine nationalism before. It has to be equity-driven, even at national level, at subnational level, at local level. We need to know that this is about everybody. And the people who are most vulnerable are the poorest of the poor, the people at the rungs of our social pyramids. And we need to target them, first and foremost, at the top of our to-do list in terms of any vaccination we have to do, whether it's malaria in future, whether it's TB, because they are the ones who are most disadvantaged in all of this. We have to take them and create an equity step for them to be able to access these things in such a way that they are not shortchanged by those of us that are relatively better off in some sense, you know. And then those ones that are super better off, you know, I won't mention names here, but
All right, Doctor. I guess that's a good place for us to leave it. We're out of time, so thank you so much for speaking with us. We appreciate the insight you've provided.
Thank you very much.